It's unbelievable to think that David Lynch's film of body horror and mind-blowing surrealism has become one of the most important pieces of its genre's cultural landscape. There have been so many artsy horror flicks in our time, but none that can compare to this classic. David Lynch's Eraserhead is essentially centered around the idea of boy meets girl, and they have a disturbing mutant child together. This film starts with a bizarre dreamlike sequence. The film then transitions to our main character, Henry Spencer, walking home with a collection of groceries. When he gets to his apartment, there's a beautiful girl that lives across the hall that stops Henry and informs him that his girlfriend, Mary X, has invited him over for dinner. Henry accepts, of course, and, for lack of a better term, the dinner wound up being odd. As Mary's mother tries to kiss Henry after cornering him, she informs him that Mary has had a child and that they must get married. Mary, however, is not sure if it really is a child. Sometime afterward, the couple moves into Henry's one-bedroom apartment where they must care for their supposed child. The child is soon revealed to be a strange creature with a snake-like head and a tightly wound swaddle for a body. This baby, or this thing, I guess is the best way to put it, it cries incessantly, becoming too much for Mary to bear, and she ends up leaving Henry to care for the baby alone. What follows this event is a number of extremely bizarre and symbolic happenings. Now, my first impressions are, well, first of all, I am completely in love with obscure, bizarre horror films such as this one. I was recommended this movie by a friend of mine years ago. I watched a clip on YouTube and immediately bought a DVD copy. When it arrived in the mail, I started it up and began watching, and I was instantly blown away by the overall mood and visual aspect of the movie. It drew me in with its mystique and almost taboo nature. Then the credits began to roll. I did not understand it at all. This often happens to me with art house horror films. I always have to watch them a second time, sometimes a third, and in the case of Eraserhead, it wasn't until the third viewing that it made a small portion of sense. The fourth time, however, I clearly understood what I was supposed to take away from this, and that's basically whatever you want to take away from it. That's why I love it so much. To be honest, I'm still trying to figure out what exactly that is, but I can give you a basic idea here later on in the review. Needless to say, this film exceeded all of my expectations. Trying to properly review this movie is an enduring exercise, to say the least. It's like trying to describe a teenage boy's impending adulthood. It needs to be experienced. Now that I think about it, that is what I constantly find myself doing with this movie, is just trying to find the right words to put to it. I guess the best and most simple word would be, it's good. But it's good just doesn't do this brilliant movie any justice, and that serene yet thick confusion, it's what makes this movie so great and original. And simply, it's good just does not put the right words to that, I guess you could say. There just isn't the right words that I could use to evoke the skin-crawling feeling that this film will most certainly give you. In terms of story, as I mentioned before, there is just nothing like it. It is such an imaginative, symbolic journey looking at what I believe is the anxiety of time. It is, according to David Lynch himself, your own interpretation, however, and I strongly suggest you give it a watch yourself. Now, there are three major themes that I would like to discuss that are apparent in Eraserhead. The first, sex. Lynch is so good at showing how sex can be a double-edged sword for humanity. On one side, sex is a pleasure and filled with comfort and warmth, where on the other side, sex can corrupt. We see this in one particular scene involving Henry and the girl across the hall as a pleasant, enjoyable experience. And we see the dark side of sex in the form of the mutant child, who looks more like a sperm that just didn't fully develop and shape before it was born. The second theme is death, and that is resembled by the world, the lighting, and the lack of color in Eraserhead. Barren and decaying, sucked of life, and left plagued by factories. However, like sex, David Lynch made death equally beautiful, as it is dark, in the form of the lady in the radiator singing a song that states that everything is fine here, making her, I guess you could say, the symbol of the Grim Reaper. promising salvation for Henry living in his rough predicament. Finally, the third and most important theme that we see with this movie is that of dreams, or nightmares in this case, and the significance they have on our lives and emotions. There is one dream sequence which I would consider the climax of the film, in which all of Henry's fears and emotions take on some physical form, whether it be a tree bleeding profusely or his head literally leaping off of his body. The most important of the two, however, is when his head jumps off of his body, because what comes out of his body after his head is gone is the sperm-like face of the infant child, symbolizing Henry's fear of the duty associated to being an adult and being a parent, and that same fear just literally tearing him apart in this case. In my research on the history and symbolism of this movie, the most common things I've come across regarding Eraserhead are the three themes that I mentioned earlier, and that brings me back to my statement at the start of this review stating that trying to describe this movie is like trying to describe being a teenager on the verge of adulthood and the anxiety of time, because that's exactly what I feel this movie means, the fear of impending grim change. All of the depth and morbidity of the story aside, the more technical aspects of Eraserhead are also genius and very, very refined. Specifically the cinematography work and the shadow play that David Lynch employs in this film. Every single second is so meticulous and provoking, raw and vast. There are so many beautiful angles that really make each of the characters and the emotions they are feeling burst. The acting is just flawless, given the scenario these individuals have been placed in. Jack Nance, who plays Henry Spencer, did not forget to include his entire body's reaction to the discomforting atmosphere, and he managed to convey so much by saying very little. Jack truly brought this character to life by paying attention to the smallest possible details of human nature. Charlotte Stewart, the actor who plays Mary X, gave a phenomenally uneasy performance, as did the rest of the members of the X family. All in all, the acting is just on point with this film, across the entire board. The sound score is also very well executed by David Lynch himself. It's soft and quiet when it needs to be, loud and chaotic when things get bizarre, and when paired with the entire movie being shot in black and white, it makes for a very grimy gothic world. The staggering 7 years it took to make this film, mainly due to funding issues, certainly paid off, and Eraserhead just oozes with love, gritty charm, and most importantly, self-reflection. My verdict is that Eraserhead is one of the most important films of the century, involving the viewer beyond just simply watching it. The film invites our morbid curiosity to try and piece together what it is David Lynch was trying to say with his revolutionary, surreal horror film. Understandably so, this movie is not for everyone, but for those of you interested in this film, it is certainly a trip, to say the least. Eraserhead is stunning and pure and continues to be a journey in of itself 40 years later, especially for the viewer willing to go above and beyond to immerse themselves in the experience and the tone of the movie. All in all, Eraserhead is just an amazing film, and I highly recommend you give it a watch.